In the early part of World War II, 110,000 people of Japanese ancestry were interned in relocation centers by Executive Order No. 9066, issued on February 19, 1942. Manzanar, the first of 10 such concentration camps, was bounded by barbed wire and guard towers, confining 10,000 people, the majority being American citizens. Ever since the U.S. Army enclosed this 1 square mile with barbed wire in 1942, people have debated how to accurately describe Manzanar. During World War II, it was officially called a war relocation center, while newspapers and some locals referred to it simply as the, quote, Jap camp. President Roosevelt and other officials on occasion referred to it as a concentration camp. No single cause can explain the exclusion of Japanese Americans as an entire ethnic group from the West Coast. A number of social, political, and historical factors contributed to President Franklin D. Roosevelt's decision to grant the U.S. Army the authority it sought. Beginning in the late 1800s, labor leaders in Western states exploited anti-Asian sentiment to protect jobs for Euro-American workers. Local politicians and newspapers amplified this prejudice to win electoral races and attract readership. As the nation still mourned its loss at Pearl Harbor, news reports of an isolated attack by a Japanese submarine on the California coast and the sensationalized, quote, Battle of Los Angeles inflamed public support for mass removal. Immigrants from Asian countries experienced both opportunity and oppression in the U.S. Beginning in the 1850s, Chinese workers on the Transcontinental Railroad and in California's gold mines transformed the labor pool in the West. Following their exclusion in the 1880s, Japanese immigrants arrived in greater numbers, a trend soon protested by labor leaders in the West. Concerned that Japanese farmers controlled a growing percentage of the state's agriculture, California legislators passed the Alien Land Law in 1913, preventing Japanese and other Asian immigrants from owning land. The 1924 Immigration Exclusion Act effectively prohibited further immigration from Japan and selected other countries, based on the legal precedent that non-whites could not become citizens. During the 10 weeks between Pearl Harbor and the signing of Executive Order 9066, newspaper columnists and politicians debated whether to oust Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Many were persuaded by Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox's statement that, quote, fifth column activity, or collaboration from within, explained Japan's stunning success at Pearl Harbor. California Attorney General Earl Warren and other politicians claimed the proximity of Japanese-owned farms to airstrips, harbors, and rail lines was proof of intended sabotage, even though most of this had already been reclaimed from marginal land decades earlier. In mid-February 1942, all of California's congressmen stated their unequivocal support for removal. Although some clergy and newspaper editors consistently voiced opposition, they could not alter the course set by the executive order. Two events during February 1942 illustrate both real and exaggerated concerns that Japan would attack, possibly invade, the West Coast. On February 23rd, a lone Japanese sub shelled an oil field at Goleta, California, north of Santa Barbara. The Navy issued an alert, and the following night, the Battle of Los Angeles broke out. The radar signature of a weather balloon, mistaken for an airplane, caused the Army to issue a green alert, meaning ready to fire. Unsubstantiated sightings of enemy planes soon followed. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, raining shrapnel down on the city and causing panic in the streets. Although the Army and Navy disputed the true nature of the event, West Coast newspapers persuasively clamored for the mass removal of Japanese Americans. The Army swung into high gear to carry out the mass relocation. Taking over racetracks, fairgrounds, and parks, it hastily prepared 16 temporary facilities. During the spring and summer of 1942, buses, trains, and convoys of cars delivered hundreds of new arrivals each day. A soldier at Santa Anita Assembly Center, the racetrack where Seabiscuit enthralled fans a few years earlier, saw newcomers, quote, weeping or simply dazed or bewildered by our formidable ranks. Internees tried to adjust to life in the centers. Children attended classes, families created makeshift homes, and many adults worked as cooks, police clerks, teachers, nurses, and doctors. Within months, they were moved again to war relocation centers. Terminal Island, San Pedro Harbor, California. When the fog rolled in, ferries stopped running from San Pedro to Terminal Island, and a single bridge linked it to the mainland. Just 3.5 miles long and a short distance from San Pedro, Terminal Island formed its own little world in the 1930s, part American company town, part traditional Japanese fishing village. Everything changed on December 7, 1941. The FBI rounded up all Japanese-American community leaders and took fishermen returning from the sea into immediate custody. The next morning, teenagers who usually rode the ferry to school were sent home. Blocked from fishing, with funds in Japanese branch banks frozen, families lost their livelihood. 10 days after the signing of Executive Order 9066, the Navy took control of Terminal Island, ordering residents to leave their homes within 48 hours. Over 3,000 islanders had to find temporary shelter and endure weeks of uncertainty until they were sent to Manzanar and other assembly centers in April 1942. Most of the Japanese Americans living on Terminal Island worked in the fishing industry. Canneries provided employment, loans for new boats, and housing. The Los Angeles Harbor Authority owned much of the land, leasing it to merchants and residents. Strong communal bonds became even stronger at Manzanar, where Terminal Islanders lived together in blocks 9 and 10. Other internees considered them, quote, rough and Japanesey. Some returned to San Pedro after the war, but never again to the island. Many of its 6,000 or so residents agreed. The best thing was to not go outside of Little Tokyo at all. In the early 1900s, a time when anti-Japanese sentiment was growing, many merchants, business owners, and produce market workers lived and worked within a 3-mile radius of First and San Pedro streets. Japanese Americans throughout Southern California went to, quote, Little Tokyo to shop for specialty items, attend festivals, and frequent favorite restaurants and theaters. During World War II, Manzanar War Relocation Center encompassed 5,415 acres, including areas for farming, ranching, water storage, sewer treatment, and other uses. This scale model shows approximately 540 acres of the camp, nearly 1 square mile, where both Japanese Americans and War Relocation Authority, WRA, staff lived and worked, though under very different conditions. The military police camp, not shown on the scale model, was located just outside the southeast, lower left, corner of the fence. Inside Manzanar's barbed wire were factories and warehouses, athletic fields and dojos, victory gardens and orchards, a hospital, and an orphanage. The administration area had both offices and housing. 36 residential blocks were separated by streets and fire breaks. Some blocks or buildings were set aside for special purposes like schools and churches, as well as for commercial services like a fish market, beauty parlor, shoe repair shop, and general store. Each block had 14 residential barracks, a recreation hall, a mess hall, men's and women's latrines, a laundry room, an ironing room, and an oil storage tank. Many individuals and families personalized their bleak apartments with homemade furniture and curtains. They planted lawns and ornamental gardens to alleviate dust. In some blocks, people built elaborate ponds beside mess halls, creating scenic spaces where they could wait in line for meals. Manzanar was built in the Owens Dry Valley, a location close to Death Valley, reaching temperatures of above 100 degrees in the summer and below 30 degrees in the winter. Living conditions were often harsh and unpredictable. Today, the buildings are gone. For a 3-week period in March 1942, Japanese Americans could move to a destination of their choice outside of the exclusion zone. However, in light of objections from Western states that did not wish to be, quote, made a dumping ground for enemy aliens, few exercised this option. Similar opposition influenced the Army's decision to transfer internees from assembly centers to permanent war relocation centers. Rather than being resettled away from the coast, internees were moved to one of 10 camps during the summer and fall of 1942. Community activities. Axel Nielsen was hired by the WRA as the community activities supervisor 2 weeks after Manzanar opened. He recalled that, quote, being separated from their busy American way of life and confined in a 1 square mile camp made internees desperate for something to do. Suddenly, there was no stopping at the corner drugstore for a Coke or ice cream, no going to the beach for a swim, and no window shopping. Recreational activities at Manzanar included events supported by Nielsen's staff, as well as many others organized by internees to satisfy a variety of interests and hobbies. Athletic programs and victory gardens developed in the fire breaks, while dances, arts and crafts classes, and clubs met in recreation buildings and mess halls. While a shortage of equipment and facilities hampered recreational efforts, Manzanar Cooperative Enterprises also subsidized cultural and athletic programs. A cooperative relationship slowly developed between Owens Valley communities and Manzanar. Local residents attended concerts, exhibits, and other Manzanar events. Some worked in the camp as teachers, laborers, and administrators, including project director Ralph Merritt. Boys and girls clubs from neighboring towns participated in activities with Manzanar youth, and Big Pine High School, a local city nearby, once competed against Manzanar's football team in a camp. The Bishop School Board, however, canceled a proposed basketball game, citing potential community protests. We did our utmost to change the student board's decision through a petition signed by the entire student body, apologized student body president Mickey Duffy in a letter to Manzanar students. Many internees participated in religious activities and worships. The Catholic St. Francis Xavier Mission and the Protestant Manzanar Christian Church first assembled in spring 1942. By that summer, a Buddhist church was active. WRA efforts to discourage certain sects of Buddhism as, quote, too Japanese, backfired, as attendance averaged 2,000 people per week. Family life. With food, housing, healthcare, and clothing allowance provided by the War Relocation Authority, family life continued under altered conditions in camp. Room assignments kept families together, but often required them to live with strangers to achieve a total of 8 per room. Privacy was scarce. 188 couples were married at Manzanar, and 541 babies were born.
They are a dislocated people who had to have some place to live, and the relocation centers seemed to be the most feasible temporary solution to the problem. Starting in July, the War Relocation Authority began to work out a program whereby evacuees with sound records might leave the centers indefinitely to take jobs and establish homes in normal communities. We believe that it is possible to distinguish between the loyal and the disloyal people of Japanese ancestry to a degree which will ensure the national security. So it is important that we all approach this problem sanely and calmly, without racial emotion or hysteria. Let's not handle this problem as Hitler would handle it in Nazi Germany, or as Tojo would approach it in Japan. Let's do it the American way.
This program came from Washington. This is a great...
The Army issued each individual or family numbered tags. Japanese Americans were required to attach the tags to their clothing and baggage during transport to the camps. A classmate recalled 17-year-old James Ito as a quiet boy who seldom went out at night. But on the night of December 6, 1942, he joined several hundred others near the Manzanar police station. Inside, Harry Ueno was under arrest for beating Fred Tayama, a past chapter president of the Japanese American Citizens League and a rumored FBI informant. Tensions and tempers were high. 8 months of confinement, grievances against the WRA and suspected informers, and rumors of black marketing of sugar and meat fueled the crowd's anger. The WRA called in the military police, and 135 soldiers deployed in a line of skirmish, attempting unsuccessfully to disperse the crowd with tear gas. As the crowd scattered in chaos, someone pushed an unoccupied vehicle towards the soldiers. 2 soldiers fired into the crowd, instantly killing James Ito. Jim Kanagawa, 21, died 5 days later. 10 others were injured. In the days that followed, 81 internees were removed from the camp, either for protection or punishment. Many of Manzanar's 100-plus military police had never before seen a, quote, Japanese. According to Lieutenant Harvey Severson, they had been, quote, trained to kill Japs, not guard them. Despite WRA objections, the Army constructed 4 guard towers in June 1942 and another 4 in November. By early 1944, the MP force had been reduced by nearly half. Although the guard towers were no longer staffed, searchlights were turned on at night for the, quote, comfort of mind of local residents. Once the U.S. Army removed Japanese Americans from the exclusion zones, a civilian agency, the War Relocation Authority, was created to operate the relocation centers and provide for internees' basic needs. Milton Eisenhower, the WRA's first director, was troubled by the internment of innocent Japanese Americans and resigned in June 1942. He advised his successor, Dillon S. Meyer, to take the position only if he could do the job and sleep at night. Meyer remained in charge until the WRA was dissolved in 1946. The War Relocation Authority assumed control of Manzanar on June 1, 1942, with a skeleton staff and the responsibility of caring for the basic needs of 10,000 people. Recruiting employees proved difficult. Defense work offered better pay, less isolation, and did not require living and working with the Japanese. However, more than 200 Caucasians eventually came to work at Manzanar. Some came to support and serve the Japanese Americans in their difficult adjustment to camp life. Some came to make their contribution to the war effort. Some came merely to collect a paycheck. Relationships between Japanese Americans and the WRA staff ranged from close friendship to indifference to hostility. While the Army manned the guard towers and oversaw external security, an internal police force maintained order within the camp. Internee police, under the direction of Caucasian officers, dealt with crimes ranging from petty theft to a murder-suicide. A judicial commission composed of internees and administration staff heard the cases. Health care. While the medical staff worked to provide good health care, living conditions were adverse to good health. Crowded barracks allowed disease to spread easily, and internees had little control over their diet. The hospital responded by creating a preventative health care program that included inoculations, well baby clinics, and food sanitation programs. While there was only one outbreak of a contagious disease and minor food poisoning incidences, tuberculosis and diet-related illnesses such as peptic ulcers and diarrhea remained a problem. 143 internees died at Manzanar. The Manzanar Hospital suffered from personnel shortages. The hospital administrator of the time recalled that we just didn't have anybody that was trained to do hospital work. X-ray, lab, pharmacy, and dentistry, so they all had to be trained and recruited. Most nurses' aides, technicians, and orderlies were Manzanar High School students. The education department at Manzanar started in the corner of one barrack in June 1942. Shortages of space, supplies, and teaching staff presented significant barriers to educating Manzanar's students. At first, 9th grader Yuri Matsunaga recalled sitting on the floor in a bare room without any desks or chairs. She was among more than 2,300 students relocated to Manzanar before the end of the 1942 school year. About 1 year later, however, the Manzanar Free Press reported about 50% of the total community population was going to school. The elementary school enrolled 1,300, the secondary school 1,400, and the adult education program 2,050. An Americanization program began in May 1942, with adult English language, democracy, and U.S. history classes taught by internees. By 1945, when Yuri graduated from high school in this auditorium, an accredited staff taught a standard curriculum in barracks classrooms. In 1942, 25% of students entering first grade could not speak English. After attending preschool at Manzanar, however, almost all of the first graders in the class of 1943 and 1944 spoke English well. Japanese Americans supported the war effort in several ways from behind barbed wire. In 1942, nearly 500 American citizens worked in Manzanar's camouflage net factory, producing 2,000 to 10,000 nets a month for the U.S. Army. Dozens of others worked on a research project to meet the nation's rubber shortage. Manzanar's internees, like many other Americans, planted victory gardens, purchased war bonds, recycled metal, and collected glycerin from laundry drains to be used in munitions manufacturing. Standing in line in front of the latrine, standing in line for our bath, that was a shock. We got sick. We couldn't go. We didn't want to go. It was smelly and it was dirty. There were no partitions, and it was so cramped that we almost touched each other. It was very humiliating. You're taking showers with strangers or sitting down on a pot with strangers with no partitions. You're right out in the open. It was a bit embarrassing. Beginning in the summer of 1942, the War Relocation Authority hired Japanese American crews to install linoleum floors and hang sheetrock on walls and ceilings. But other promised improvements never appeared. People who could afford it bought items from catalogs or had belongings delivered from storage. Some people built furniture from scrap wood, nails, and cement that they borrowed for the duration. Although the barracks improved, life for many became more challenging in 1943. The government forced everyone 17 and older to answer what came to be called the Loyalty Questionnaire. Authorities planned to use people's answers to draft young Japanese American men into the Army, clear some people for resettlement in the Midwest or East Coast, and to identify those to be segregated into a high-security camp. The Mess Halls of Manzanar. The first dinner served at Manzanar to 84 people on March 21, 1942, consisted of canned Army rations. The incarcerated Japanese American cooks slept in an unfinished mess hall next to Manzanar's only operating stove. By the end of April, cooks in 10 mess halls struggled to feed more than 7,000 people. By late 1942, each mess hall served 3 meals to about 300 people daily. Agricultural and industrial workers produced much of the food. Mess halls became integral to life in Manzanar as places where people attended meetings, dances, movies, and farewell parties. When the camp closed, dismantled mess halls provided lumber for the packing crates people needed to resume life outside the barbed wire. As hundreds of Japanese Americans arrived each day during spring 1942, many of Manzanar's barracks and mess halls were still under construction. Completed kitchens served up to 800 people a day, in multiple shifts lasting until midnight. By the time the WRA assumed control of the center from the Army in June, mess hall operations were in full swing. Manzanar's first mess hall chefs awoke early on March 22, 1942, to prepare meals for 710 new arrivals. They fixed dinner from canned goods and served it on metal mess kits. Nearly 4 years later, a mess hall chef arose at 4:30 a.m. to fix breakfast for the remaining 49 internees. While they ate their last Manzanar meal, chef and diners alike prepared to leave camp and restart their lives. All told, mess hall workers served 28,790,221 meals to 11,070 Japanese Americans at Manzanar.
More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, for these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent. Yes, the nation was then at war, struggling for its survival, and it's not for us today to pass judgment upon those who may have made mistakes while engaged in that great struggle. Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake. For throughout the war, Japanese Americans in the tens of thousands remained utterly loyal to the United States. The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
President Ronald Reagan signed the redress bill on August 10, 1988. Each former internee alive on that day became eligible for a letter of apology and a one-time payment of $20,000 from the U.S. government. The World War II exclusion of Japanese Americans lasted from 1942 to 1945. Nearly 40 years later, the Commission on the Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians concluded Executive Order 9066 was not justified by military necessity. The broad historical causes that shaped these decisions were race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. At the heart of the experience lies the U.S. Constitution and the rights and protections it promises all Americans. The last Japanese Americans left Manzanar on November 21, 1945, with a one-way ticket and $25 provided by the WRA. They left behind barracks, ponds and gardens, dusty baseball diamonds, and enduring structures, including the sentry posts, cemetery monuments, and auditoriums. They took with them the memories of life behind barbed wire. It's been an interesting experience exploring Manzanar. If you like what you saw today, make sure to subscribe, as always. And I'll see you in the next one.